Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session 5 of our Teacher Professional Development series here at the Louisiana Department of Education. Today, our focus is on systematic explicit phonics instruction. Just for those of you guys who are new, or maybe those of you guys who haven't been here too much, my name is Sarah Stolman. I am the K-2 Literacy PD Specialist here at the Louisiana Department of Education. If you have any questions or if I can be of any help to you whatsoever, feel free to reach out to me at sarah.stolman@la.gov, or you can always tweet using the hashtag Louisiana Literacy and the hashtag Reading Revival, because we are in the midst of a reading revival, and it's because of the hard work of you guys, the wonderful teachers here in the state of Louisiana. You guys are our boots in the ground workers. You guys are the ones who are doing that hard work and making sure that our students are learning how to read. So I definitely want to, I want this to be helpful, and I want this to work for you guys. So definitely, if there's anything that I can do for you, do let me know. Just a few housekeeping things. If this does become kind of a large meeting. So please make sure that you stay muted and turn off your video. If you don't know how to do that, you just kind of hover around the bottom left corner of your screen and cross off the stop video, or click on stop video. And if you have any accessibility needs, you can email at ldlecommunications@la.gov, and I'll be happy to support you. And you can also help with me. Or you can also email me if you have any questions, and I can kind of support you in that way too. Throughout the session, if you guys have any questions, definitely put those in the chat. I know sometimes it might seem a lot like me talking in these sessions, but the idea with these sessions is that this is our first step in our professional development series. So, we're developing all of these meetings. You might look on the Louisiana Literacy library, and you'll notice that we're posting videos of these sessions along with session redelivery guidance, so that you can use these back at your school as you share this information with your colleagues, or if you're a school leader, with your teachers. But moving forward, we are going to work to develop communities of practice with you guys, which are much more collaborative. They're much more about talking with you guys, troubleshooting, problem solving, planning, all of those things. So this is really just our first step in this PD plan that we have. So just kind of bear that in mind. But if you do have any questions as we move through the series, definitely pop those right in the chat. And if we can't answer them today, we will definitely find an answer and get back to you guys. You guys know that each week at the end, or after each session, we do have an engage question. And for those of you guys who respond to that engage question through either emailing me or through tweeting with the hashtag Louisiana Literacy or Reading Revival, I do select door prize winners. And so I hope that everybody who has received the door prize so far has already received it. I put those in the mail. But today's door prize winners are Lavasha Moss, Melissa Watson, and Janina Bass. So if you are on the call, if any of you guys are on the webinar today, send me an email, and you can send me your address, or if you prefer to send me your school address, that's fine. And I will drop your door prize in the mail today. And then don't forget today to either tweet or email me your response to our engage question for today. But I don't want to take up much more time talking about this, because today we're going to talk about phonics. And as you guys know, in the science of reading, I mean, this is a big topic in the science of reading. So I don't want to waste a second. I want to move right in. Now, in our last session, we spent time defining phonemic and phonological awareness and learning the difference between them. We learned about kind of phonological awareness is really listening for all of those different parts of words, syllables, onsets and rhymes, rhyming words, whereas phonemic awareness is really kind of focusing on the phoneme, which is that smallest unit of sound in our language. And manipulating and substituting and deleting phonemes in words. And these are all auditory skills. So these are things that you can do in the dark. They don't require a connection to what we're going to talk about today, the grapheme. But they're very important kind of pre-alphabetic skills. So these are things that you really do, these aren't just things you kind of gloss over, and if they don't get it, oh, it's not a big deal. These skills are highly predictive of their success with reading. So you definitely want to spend that time doing this important work. And in our last session, we explained how phonemic and phonological awareness were essential foundational skills for developing skilled readers. But today, our objective is that by the end of this session, you're going to be able to explain the importance of systematic, explicit phonics instruction in developing skilled readers. So as I told you guys like several sessions ago, one of the biggest misconceptions I have about this, or that I've heard about the science of reading, is that the science of reading is just phonics, right? I've heard that several times, and really, I hope that through these series, you guys are starting to realize that the science of reading is so much more than just phonics. But phonics is a very important part of the science of reading. So when we think back to Scarborough's reading rope and we're focusing on those strands associated with word recognition, we know that when we talk about decoding, we're talking about using that knowledge that we have of letters and their corresponding sounds, or graphemes and their corresponding sounds, to make sense of words. And so phonics is a hugely important part of the science of reading. And it's very important that we teach it in a very systematic and explicit way. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the importance of this in developing skilled readers. Now, I always like to start off just kind of with a broad definition. And I have a couple here because, they're really saying the same thing, but they're saying it in a couple of different ways. But this first definition comes from Alice Scarlett, the developer of the reading rope. And so what she says is phonics is an approach to, or a type of reading instruction that is intended to promote the discovery of the alphabetic principle, this correspondences between phonemes and graphemes, so sounds and spellings, and phonological decoding. And then a second definition saying essentially the same thing, but phonics is the study of the relationships between letters and the sounds that they represent. And it's also used to describe reading instruction that teaches sound symbol correspondences. So phonics really is the study of these relationships. We often talk about it as, just kind of a content area or a subject that we teach to our early students. But really it is the study of the relationships between letters and their sounds. But it's also used to describe that reading instruction. So all of these are really essential, really important definitions in explaining what phonics is. Phonics is not the same thing as phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, right? Because it's now we're introducing the letter, the grapheme. You cannot do phonics work in the dark the way that you could do phonological awareness or phonemic awareness work in the dark. So, it's slightly more complex than the work that we were discussed in our last session. Now, why is phonics important? Well, you guys have probably heard this a million times, but our language is very complex. English is a very, very complex language. And in the English language, we have 44 phonemes and really hundreds of spellings for these different phonemes. And so, I've been throwing around this term grapheme. And really a grapheme, it can be a letter or it can be a group of letters that are put together to represent the sound that a phoneme makes, right? So if I think about the sound ch, right? The grapheme for the sound ch is the digraph CH, right? So it's just the spelling of the sound. So it's kind of a fancy word if you haven't heard it before. But when I talk about a grapheme, that's what I'm talking about. It can be more than one letter, as the case of digraphs show, or double letter spellings, things of that nature. Now, about 80 of these hundreds of different spellings occur frequently enough that they really warrant direct systematic instruction for our students, right? If our students can learn these 80 very frequent spellings, they're going to be able to decode most words in the English language. Louisa Moats in her book, Speech to Print, she talks about how, if you learn these 80 spellings, you're going to be pretty good. The rest are very obscure, and it might be more appropriate to kind of teach them through like an understanding of, just differences in etymology or, language differences, things like that. They're really kind of a case by case thing. But really our work zeroes in on teaching our students to master these 80 very, very common spellings. And if students can master these phonics skills, they're going to be able to easily decode just about any word. So it is very important that they know that. Now, what is phonics not? Okay, so just like we talk about what phonics is, I think it's really important at this point to talk about what phonics is not. So phonics, again, involves teaching students letter sound correspondences so that they're able to decode words quickly and automatically. Phonics does not involve teaching part word guessing, or what we sometimes refer to as this 3-cueing method, right? Does it look right? Does it sound right? Does it make sense? This is not phonics. We're not encouraging students to kind of get their mouth ready, take a look at the picture, and then guess based on context what they think the word is. We want them to have the skills so that they're able to decode the entire word. Now, if you need additional information on that, you can click here. And on our Louisiana, I'll come back here, and I'm gonna come here because I want to show you guys this. If you come to our literacy landing page, we have a really helpful document. And these are some foundational skills, but you can see right here, if you want to know what does providing systematic explicit phonics instruction mean, it means this, and it does not mean this. So teachers should not wait to introduce phonics in response to a perceived student weakness. Teaching reading and spelling should follow a specific process of linking graphemes to phonemes rather than promoting memorization, repetition, or using ineffective strategies like rainbow spelling. Now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to, now phonics is not getting your mouth ready. And like I said, taking a guess based on those picture clues. And, I think it's a point at which we want to kind of stop and reflect and think about some of these strategies that we're using in our class. And really, are they promoting or are they encouraging our kids to use what they know about phonics to decode words? Or are we encouraging them to guess? And, we're in the summer here, and, this might be a good time for you to reflect on your practice and think about, what are you doing and what might be something that you want to improve upon as you move into next year. So keep that in mind as we kind of move through today's presentation. Now, phonics has the greatest impact on children's reading when it begins in the earliest years, so in kindergarten and first grade. And systematic and explicit phonics instruction is more effective than non-systematic or non-explicit phonics instruction. I know like when I first started teaching kids to read years ago, the idea was that like you were going to teach them at point of need, right? So if I knew that like she didn't understand that EE made the sound E, I would stop her right there in the context of what she was reading and provide on the spot instruction to help her there, right? But what research is consistently showing us now is that our students need systematic and explicit instruction in phonics. All of our students need this instruction if they're going to be able to read. Think of it as you're building a toolkit for them, right? Word attack skills that you're giving them so that they can decode any word that they encounter. As we talked about word recognition in the previous section, certainly by second grade, we don't want them laboring over every word and decoding every word. But the work of decoding promotes automaticity, and that sight recognition, that's our ultimate goal, right? So the struggle that they go through in learning to decode and that work that they do with decoding activates the brain, the parts of the brain that really stimulate that sight recognition. So this is very, very, very important work that we're doing. So that now we're going to kind of jump into how do you teach phonics, right? And we all, we're all using different curricula. We maybe are doing our own, developing our own lessons for this, but a program of systematic phonics instruction clearly identifies a carefully selected and useful set of letter-sound relationships and then organizes the introduction of these relationships into a logical instructional sequence. So most of the curricula that we use that have, kind of a focus on phonics do introduce the code in a systematic, explicit way. And what each of these programs tend to do is they begin with the most common or the least ambiguous spelling patterns, and they gradually introduce less common and more complex spelling patterns. So can you guys see my screen? Okay, so something flagged up here, but okay. Now, one of the questions I often get is, if you don't have a curriculum that you feel has a really well thought out and well developed scope and sequence for identifying or for introducing phonics skills, what do you do, right? I mean, that's a big job. And for many of us, like we didn't take a class in like phonics instruction in college or any, I mean, if you did, wonderful, but for many of us, we didn't. And so there are some key characteristics of a high quality phonics scope and sequence. And this comes from this book, A Fresh Look at Phonics by Wiley Blevins. And I would highly recommend this book to anybody who teaches phonics to K-3 students, or really any students. But it's a wonderful book that gives you tons of great information about the best practices associated with phonics instruction. But in this book, he suggests that some of the key characteristics of this high quality phonics scope and sequence is that they build from the simplest to most complex skills in a way that takes advantage of previous learning, right? Like you're not going to start off teaching students that the A sound is spelled E-I-G-H first, right? You're going to start with the least complex spelling of that before you move into more complex spellings. You're also not going to start with, obscure vowel blends before you've introduced basic consonants. So you're starting with this idea of like the simplest spelling patterns, and then you're moving into more complex spelling patterns. Good scopes and sequences are also created so that many words can be formed as early as possible. Because as we know, once you build that capacity in your students to kind of read some words, it becomes reinforcing. So once they can read some words, then they want to read more, right? And they get this idea that if they just learn these patterns, they're going to be able to do it much, much faster. So these scopes and sequences are created so that many words can be formed as early as possible. We're looking at like more common spellings. You're not going to introduce x before you introduce because is a very, very common spelling. And that goes to, they teach high utility skills before less useful sound spellings. Again, many, many words have the sound in them, but not many words have the spelling in them, right? So we're going to think about the ones that have the biggest bang for the buck, and that's what we're going to teach first. And another thing, and I think like when I always reflect back to when I like started teaching, and I like kind of like cringe a little bit at all the things I did wrong. But this is a big one that I did wrong. But a good scope and sequence is going to separate easily confused letters and sounds to avoid potential difficulties. So you're not going to teach b and d at the exact same time. Why? Because we all know that students tend to confuse B and D. right? So we're going to introduce those in we're going to separate those in our scope and sequences, or p and qua. We're going to separate those in our scopes and sequences, just because that will make it easier for them to master these skills before we introduce similar things. And a good scope and sequence is one that works for a majority of students, but it has opportunities for built-in differentiation. Now, one of the things I will say, and as a teacher, I think it's really important, even if you're teaching from a curriculum, and as a coach and as an assistant principal, I would always tell my teachers this, but you have to be smarter than your curriculum, right? And I think that, that's a quote from Louisa Moats, but we have to know this content in a way that is much deeper than what we can't just get in front of the class and kind of read from our curriculum. We have to understand this content. And I think nowhere is that more important than with phonics. You have to understand this code. You have to understand how these graphemes work. You have to understand phonics, because those kids are going to ask you a question, or they're going to do something, and you have to be prepared to remediate right there on the spot. So if you take a book like Louisa Moats' Speech to Print, I can't, recommend that highly enough. I mean, it's a wonderful book, but if you read that book, you're going to understand how our English language works, and you're going to be able to provide instruction to your students. And even though you're providing whole group instruction, when that kid sitting in the second row does something not quite right, you're going to immediately know how to remediate and support that student in that way. So, it's really incumbent upon you to understand the code in a really meaningful way. And I would use my summertime to really read this book. I have it right here, and sometimes it won't come off with it won't come up with the background, but Speech to Print by Louisa Moats. I mean, I can't recommend that highly enough either. Just a great book to have on your bookshelf in your classroom, and to read through. Okay. This is just kind of a good little image, and it kind of shows you, we were talking about scope and sequences. If I'm a kindergarten teacher, the very first thing I'm going to work on with my students is not multi-syllabic words or syllable types or things like that, right? Like, that's a much more complex skill that I'm going to get into at the latter part of second grade. But in kindergarten, I'm going to start with my ABCs, right? And, there is some evidence that students who rapidly identify letter names are much more easily, are able to much more easily like connect letter sounds with those names as you start introducing those letter sounds. And so, as you move through kindergarten, you're introducing your short vowels and consonants, short vowels and blends at the beginning of first grade, and then short vowels and digraphs finally. And you can read through this to see this progression of how we introduce these skills, these phonics skills as we move through the grade levels. But again, we start with the least complex, and we build on what they know as we get into more and more complex skills. And when I say complex, they're not super complex. Like, I don't want you to feel like, oh my God, they're never going to be able to get this or anything like that. I mean, that these students, they grasp onto it. Their minds are like little sponges, and they grasp onto it. But we have to be very systematic in how we introduce it. And we have to introduce it in a way that makes sense and builds on what they already know. So definitely keep that in mind as you're, preparing to teach. And one thing I did want to say, I kind of went off on a tangent a little bit about your curriculum. A lot of the research shows that it takes kids about 6 to 8 weeks from the point of the first introduction to a phonics skill to be able to master that skill, right? And they master it through having a lot of opportunities to apply that knowledge. One of the things that Wiley Blevins talks about in A Fresh Look at Phonics, which I think is really, really smart, is that, you have to reflect on your teaching and think about like, okay, I'm going to introduce this spelling. So say I'm a first grade teacher and I'm going to introduce the digraphs, right? I'm going to introduce CH. I'm going to introduce it to the students. I'm going to talk very little. It doesn't take me a lot of time to explain that CH makes this sound ch. I might show them some examples of words that have that ch spelling in it, right? Words that they can otherwise decode. Chip, chum, things like that. Words where they can decode the rest of the word that have that. But then I'm going to give them plenty of opportunities to apply that knowledge, right? I want to have opportunities for them to read those words, maybe the words in isolation. I also want to have opportunities, and this is so important, for them to read the words with those spellings in decodable texts, right? So you want them to be able to read a story that they can decode that has that. You want them to be able to apply that new learning in text that they're reading, right? So you want to give them ample opportunities to do that. And so you need decodable readers or decodable passages that include those spellings in them. You also want to give them opportunities to practice writing words. Give them dictation sentences or dictated sentences, that include words like that, or spelling assessments. You want to give them many, many different opportunities to practice those skills. One of the things that I think we do too much as teachers is I think we try to kind of rush some of these, we rush some of these skills, but truly it takes the average student 6 to 8 weeks to be able to truly master it. And by master it, I mean, anytime they encounter that spelling, they're not struggling with it. And, we're going to talk about reading fluency in a later session. But I will tell you, it's really interesting because I used to kind of track their fluency, and I had a little tracker that I would use. And we'll talk about that when we get to that because I love talking about fluency too. But anytime I would introduce like a new kind of group of sound spellings, so say it was digraphs, like my students would be making great progress on their fluency, and then I would have a dip, right? And as I analyzed their records, I would notice that the words that they were struggling with were the words that had the new sound spelling. So did I sit there and like fret and worry? No, but I knew I had to give them many different opportunities to practice their new learning in many different ways. So that's the kind of stuff that I would do. So, as they become more proficient, then you're going to move into more complex skills. So you'll move into that magic E or that final E, which, can be a big challenge for students. R controlled vowels, all of those things. But just be mindful and think of many different varied ways you can introduce it, and you can sustain that for them until they truly have mastered that content. I kind of talked through this, but these are just some possible sequences for teaching. We're going to have this posted in the literacy library. You see, we start with consonants, short vowels, basic digraphs, this floss rule in kindergarten. If it's a single syllable word that has a short vowel in it that ends with F, L, or S, you're going to double that. Your long vowel patterns and ng and unk. And then in first and through third grade, that's where you're going to start getting into the more complex spellings. All of these things listed here. But again, there are many different scopes and sequences. A fresh look at phonics is a great place to really kind of support you as you think through developing that scope and sequence for your students. So, I definitely recommend that book. It's going to be listed in the references in this in these slides too. So if you need that reference, you can get it. As they get more proficient, you'll introduce things like prefixes and suffixes and roots, building their capacity to like break down words and engage in kind of morphological analysis, really study words in that way. But you're not going to start that day one in kindergarten, right? Like this is a more complex skill. So keeping that in mind. Now, how do we assess phonics skills? Well, some of the things that we can do that, I would highly recommend, and guys, they don't have to be complex. I think that's just something really important to remember. But, you know, cumulative and comprehensive word reading assessments, you know, if I'm teaching that, if this is the week where I'm teaching those digraphs and I've introduced those digraphs, I might have 4 words and I'm going to go around to each of my students and I'm going to ask them to read those words for me, right? And I'm going to keep track of that every week. So every time I introduce a new spelling, I'm going to kind of keep track of that. And then over time, I might go back and revisit it, you know, through a comprehensive word reading assessment. I'm going to give you guys some tools for that too. Spelling assessments are great. You know, have a little spelling test once a week that has words that include the spellings that you've taught. Dictation assessments where you read them or you read a sentence and you have them write what they hear. And then decoding assessments, including reading fluency. You know, as I said, those are wonderful because you're measuring so many different things, but you can get a good sense of for what phonics skills they might be struggling with through those types of assessments. I just want to quickly show you this link because I think you'll love this. I'm gonna come right in here. But this website has so many great little resources for you to use. They have letter sound assessments, spelling assessments. You can see right here, it'll say, this is a spelling assessment that you might give on the first day of school, and then write a note about what you see. And if you're like, oh, I don't even know what to write, you can see an example of what like how this teacher would have analyzed it. Word ladders are great. Many different resources here. We have a comprehensive phonics survey, cumulative phonics mastery checks. So definitely check out this website for many great resources for you. Now, my last kind of final thoughts that I want to share with you guys today, and I'll come back to present, is that it's very important that phonics be taught in a systematic way. So it cannot be taught at point of need. And you know, you really have to, if you don't feel comfortable just kind of generating that on your own, you know, a systematic plan for how you're going to introduce all of these different sound spellings, that's fine. I probably wouldn't feel comfortable generating that list on my own either. You know, our curricula do a great job of like kind of introducing them in this systematic way. But if you're like, I just want to know a little bit more, go to books like A Fresh Look at Phonics or Speech to Print, because they're going to give you that information and help you understand the why behind why they might introduce things in that way. And, you know, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about you kind of have to know more than your curriculum. You have to be smarter than your curriculum. And one of the things I always found as a teacher was that the more I learned, the more I understood why my curriculum laid things out in the way that they did. So I stopped questioning it as much because I was like, oh, yeah, I would have done that. But I also felt more empowered to make some instructional decisions that I needed to make because I understood the why. Teaching students to identify sound spelling correspondences enables them to decode words. And we're going to talk about decoding tomorrow. So tune in for that. But you know, if they don't know these spellings, they're going to struggle to decode. I mean, you know, that just, it's pretty obvious. And they have to be able to do that quickly because the goal is that they're decoding with automaticity. Right? We don't want them sitting there for 3 seconds thinking about what sound CH makes, or going, if they're trying to decode the word chip, going, hip. No. You know, and we've heard them decode in that way, right? But we want to be really attuned to kind of what they're doing so that we can provide that targeted instruction right there. And really, just during phonics instruction, spend less time talking at your students and more time giving them opportunities to practice and apply their newly acquired knowledge. Videotape yourself if you need to. You know, if you're doing the majority of the talking in the lesson, think about how you can kind of minimize that. And you know, that was hard for me because, you know, I like to talk and I like to talk to my students and but you know, I had to really reflect on that as a teacher and really kind of parse my words a little bit and let them do the work, right? It'll make a profound difference in their ability to learn. And really recognize that it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks from point of introduction to mastery. So they need all of that time to practice those skills with many different opportunities to do it. Now, our engaged question today, so feel free to email this to me or to tweet your response, but what are some crucial considerations for effective phonics instruction? And then I want you to think, do you have a scope and sequence to detail how you will introduce phoneme grapheme correspondences, or do you need to develop one to use? What things must you consider when developing an effective scope and sequence? So if you don't have one in your curriculum, or if you maybe want to kind of tweak it or something like that, I want you to think about what are these very important considerations. And I'm going to have our colleagues are going to pop that in the chat. As always, if you wouldn't mind just kind of taking a second to do our session feedback form, they're going to pop that link in the chat too, if they don't mind. And I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen here. I don't know why it's not working here, but what I'm going to do is we'll stop right here. But if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I do want to thank you guys for joining us today. I really do appreciate you taking time out of your summer. I know that this is, this is that time for you to recharge. So I'm so grateful that you're here, growing your own understandings, and I'm here to support you in any way. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, guys.